Today's conversation, I have the Nyeri gubernatorial candidate Wahome Gakuru, Sarangombe MCA Owino Kotieno, lawyer and analyst Brenda Mdivo, and government expert John Kaguchia. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Morning Express. Now we start off with the court, opposition and executive that after NASA and Jubilee principals engaged in over the court rulings over the weekend. Now party stalwarts have now taken to the streets. Now let's listen in now to the courts, to that furor that has been playing out in the courts. Let's listen in.
Justice Odunga is related to James Orengo through marriage. He's married to Sarah Odunga, who is the daughter of the late Archbishop Ondiek, and therefore is a relative of Orengo.
My nearest relative would be Uhuru Kenyatta, because his sister was married in Ugenya to a cousin of mine, known as Dr. George Owino, who was a dentist.
As Chief Justice, I'm not going to respond every time to statements made by anybody in the public.
All right, so that begins our conversation on the political point this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, just basing from the statements we've had there, let me begin with you, Kotieno. What does this say about the state of our democracy and rule of law if we have the highest holders of office really bringing accusations that an independent body as the judiciary is being biased towards political parties?
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. Well, at some point I was expecting this, because we are yet to hold an election of a very, very serious magnitude, and the stakes are so high. And just as you know, these local players or our political class, they hardly accept probably where they need to accept. Like for this case, in my own opinion, judiciary is an institution that ought to be above reproach. For it to be above reproach, these other arms of the government must also support it. It can never be beyond reproach if it is not getting that support that it needs most.
Right.
It's important at this particular moment that our political leaders ought to understand that if Constitution contemplates that these institutions are going to be independent or ought to be independent, then there should be nothing else short of that. And Kenyans have a duty at this particular moment in time to perform their role. And their role has actually been captured in Article 3 of this Constitution that clearly says that every person has an obligation to defend, uphold, and respect the Constitution.
Right.
And even the president himself must actually live with the spirit and the letter of that article. Even members of the opposition, everybody in this country. So these attacks that we are seeing against the judiciary are unwarranted. We normally say in my vernacular that a court is not somebody's house. Any court or court court is here mama ya mutu, that you will walk in and walk out at will and get what you want.
Right.
It will never happen like that. What you get from the court is actually what you deserve. And if you look even at the judgment, I think the judges were a bit fair to the Kenyan people, because they said the judgment only affects the presidential ballot. And they also said there was still time to have a process that is going to be far much credible, far much fair, and one that will actually hold Article 10 of the Constitution, Article 2247 of the Constitution, and even the principles that would enable us to get free, fair, and credible elections.
Right.
This noise should not be there.
Just drawing from that, let's bring in Joy Brenda, especially as a lawyer. First of all, did the attacks, or did the statements, especially even by the president, warrant an attack to you against the judiciary? And secondly, there are methods of appeals set out within the judiciary. There are disciplinary measures as well set out against judges who do not abide by their oaths. Has the executive seemingly exhausted all these issues in terms of the accusations they're bringing forward?
You have to remember that the person who had been taken to court was not Jubilee, it was actually the IEBC. And in making the statements that the president was making, first it must be nuanced with the situation where he was. He was in a rally talking to his supporters regarding something that is in the public domain. That is one. Secondly, I have sat in the judiciary before, and what would amount to judicial intimidation if somebody picked up a phone and called me and told me what to do in a particular matter? Statements that are made in a marketplace, someplace. I don't think the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court judges are quaking in their boots because they have had pronouncements from a marketplace. So is it an attack? It's no more than an attack than what we saw NASA doing 2-3 months ago, right, when they're talking about the constituency telling Rao, saying how they are going to boycott the elections, how if the court does not come with a particular response to the matter, then it's all done in the political arena, and what is good for the goose is good for the gander. So does it amount to an attack? I don't think so. This whole thing is being blown out of proportion. And that's why I support the Chief Justice when he says, look, you guys say what you're going to say. We are going to stand on the rule of law, and that is why we have been put into power. But looking at the entire scenario, talking about the independence of institutions, I must say that the institution I think is under attack is not the judiciary, it's actually the IEBC, because the onslaught that they have suffered over the last 2-3 years, they have been in court constantly at every step because of one thing or another. So if we are looking at an institution that, one, we have commissioners who came in a bit late in the day, we're expecting them to play catch-up, but rather than playing catch-up, they're in court all the time. Right. The cost to the taxpayer, the cost in time, the cost in efficiency is one thing that as Kenyans we need to compute and say, look, are we at the end of the day going to have credible elections if all that we are seeing from the IEBC is court this, court that, court this, court that? So in my opinion, it's the IEBC that's under attack, not the judiciary.
I don't know whether you hold the same view, Kagusha, that this was not really an attack against the judiciary. I mean, we've had the Chief Justice, David Maraga, come out and warn political players against eroding public confidence in the judiciary. And many have lauded him for coming out very quickly and speaking and defending the judiciary, especially after those remarks by the president. But like Joy Brenda mentions, this is no different from what NASA did, especially during the ruling on the presidential tallying of presidential votes. They said they will take to the streets if the court does not rule in their favor. Does that amount to intimidation of the judiciary?
Well, judiciary should not be intimidated by those kind of statements, but in my opinion, I think it was not right, that kind of a statement in a public rally, as it was given from the head of state and the deputy head of state. I think they should have been restrained from that kind of statement in that place. But again, I would also want to point out that the Chief Justice has now, I think about 3 times, also made public pronouncements, which I think are actually attracting responses. Because then when you start engaging politicians on very, very sensitive and critical issues at the public place, then you expect responses from them. Remember, the first time the Chief Justice talked about this is when he said that the courts and the judiciary is not going to stop the election from being held on 8th. Really, I don't think that statement, especially coming on that particular case, was necessary. He should have restrained again.
Is it just even as you continue with this? Joy Brenda brought in the issue of IEBC. Many times there's been a lot of allegations leveled against IEBC, and complaints come in the manner that IEBC is not stomping its independence, coming out and speaking out against these issues. So we're seeing the Chief Justice doing exactly that. So is that wrong
not really,
for the judiciary?
Not really. I do not think that actually those things, two things can actually be compared, because that was a case that had just been launched in court. And then the Chief Justice says, and he was actually responding to politicians when they said that now we think what NASA has done and what the civil society is doing by going to court about this issue is going to stop us from having an election on 8th. Right. And of course, the Chief Justice said, no, this case, whichever way we are going to do it, is going to ensure that we have an election on 8th. Of course, then how do you say that before the case is decided? That's number one. Then number two is when he came again and said that we are not going to, it's not right for IEBC to go ahead and print ballot papers when you have a case that is going on in court. Yet, the judges did not stop that from going on. In fact, they refused to stop the printing of ballot papers from going on. And of course, then you see him now coming later on to explain himself and say that he was misunderstood. Was it necessary? Those are pronouncements which I think he should keep quiet. He should let the process of judiciary take its own course in its own way. Now, of course, those two things that he said, and of course now you see him now coming again later, trying to say he's not going to be responding to everything And I like what Joy said before we started this forum, like, but, you know, by saying that in itself, you're actually responding.
Right.
Now, so I think you should restrain from public engagement in the public place. And I think then that way, politicians will also keep off. Because, you know, when NASA kept on, you know, poking holes on IEBC and judiciary, earlier on, before these late victories, everyone was like, you people stop attacking the judiciary, stop attacking the IEBC.
The IEBC.
But now, of course, what has happened from Jubilee is not different either. And I think that should stop.
So where do we draw the line, Kagucha, when it comes to cementing public confidence in the judiciary, with all these attacks coming left, right, and center? Whose honest is it to speak to the citizen and tell them this is not true, this is not happening, this is the stand of the judiciary?
The person who actually is, you know, removing the shade and leaving the judiciary in sunlight is actually the CJ himself. I wish he can stop, and he need to just himself just ask the politicians to ensure that they respect the court. And of course, that way, politicians will do that. But then there's also another issue that was raised yesterday, and I will raise it because it was raised officially, also in an official meeting, that there seems to be a conflict of interest. And the question was asked is there a conflict of interest when a judge is related to the advocate in a case? And you know, that's a very, very profound issue in law. And I think that's something that need to be responded to. And you remember, initially, Justice Odunga was actually asked to disqualify himself from listening to that case, from hearing the case. And he, of course, absolutely, he said he's not going to, you know, get off the case. I think that raises very fundamental questions that need answers. And you see, those are the issues that then also kind of bring the confidence of the judiciary to a lower level. Remember, when...
All right, just a minute. We will come back to you, especially on that issue. I want to hear from Dr. Gakuru here. Dr. Gakuru, you're running on a Jubilee ticket for the Nyeri gubernatorial seat. Was, first of all, the remarks by President Uhuru Kenyatta in order?
Well, I start with my president on the remarks that he's made on this, because if we have a situation where individuals are sitting in an institution that's supposed to be independent, that's the judiciary, and those individuals are in one way or another appear to, because of an issue of appearance, to be biased, I think we need to actually call these individuals, you know, call them up and ask the questions that need to be asked. But I want to go with my sister here, Wakiri, in terms of the institutions here that is actually under attack. It is not the judiciary at all. We need, as citizens, because of our democracy, to ask questions. When judgments are made, we need to go back and ask, was this really fair? Have we done something that is right? But if you look at IEBC, to me, this guy is beyond the whole question of affecting their productivity and efficiency and all of that. We've also done a lot of damage to the morale of the Kenyans who work in that institution, because it appears like we want to actually paralyze them from delivering something so important. How are we going then to assure that we are going to provide a situation where we have free, fair, transparent vote on the 8th of August? We don't actually have the time.
Right. I want to focus on more of the allegations that Jubilee made against the judiciary, but let's begin with you, Joy, in terms of the concern raised by Kaguchia here. So according to the Jubilee party, they say that the court was biased because Justice George Odunga, who was sitting on the bench which delivered the ruling on the Al Ghurair, rather, is a wife to, his wife is a niece to Siaya Senator James Orengo. And then they say that Justice William Oko, who sat on the bench that delivered the ruling on the presidential tallying, is also related to the wife of Raila Odinga, that is Ida Odinga. And so Kagucha raises an important question. In terms of these relations and the constitution of the court, we're talking about relation by marriage. You know, it comes to a point where almost everybody could be related if we're talking of relation by marriage. James Orengo there says he's also related to President Uhuru Kenyatta by marriage. So in terms of constituting the benches and ensuring credibility and transparency, where does the court begin?
You know, the adage that a judge should be like Caesar's wife, above reproach, is meant to address some of these concerns. When you have got a situation that's as delicate as this, something as simple as a last name could be used in in casting aspersions where there's actually none to be cast. Like I said earlier, judicial independence is one of those things where, short of you standing in somebody's chambers with a gun to his head, a judge is free to do what his conscience rules him to do. So having relations, degrees of affinity and consanguinity, like you said, they say we're only 6 degrees removed from your net relatives.
Right.
If you just sit long enough with somebody, you'll find out, oh, by the way, we have
some
relationship.
somewhere.
But I think what Jubilee is trying to say is saying, look, there is a pattern. These people seem to be finding judges who are sympathetic to their cause and ensuring that they get on those benches. Whether that allegation is founded or not is something that I hope the ones who made the statements will be willing to produce some evidence. Because just simply saying that they're related does not mean that it necessarily affected the outcome of the case.
Right.
And in my opinion, it's one of those things also, we shouldn't be stooping that low, because as citizens, we ought to have faith in the institutions that we have. And if you're talking about overcoming tribalism, it should not matter. The judge who sits on your matter, we should be able to trust him to deliver a credible case. But looking at the current scenario, where we are right now as a nation, we are not yet at that place where that is a reality. And therefore, even the Chief Justice, in appointing these benches, he ought to have those sensitivities. He has quite a number of judges from whom he can choose to constitute a bench that would seem, quote-unquote, neutral. So, in my opinion, he ought to strive to go in that direction, because such attacks are very low blows, but they are blows nonetheless. And for the people who, now the public, in whom the confidence in the judiciary is most critical, such indicators are things that actually erode the confidence rather than do anything to build it up. And that's why I was a bit disturbed by how low the blows came from. But at the end of the day, it is a political season and everybody is trying to come out hammer and tongs. And so they say all is fair in love and war.
Right. Kotieno, do you agree with this, especially the selection of the panel of judges that delivered both rulings on the election petitions?
To me, the issue is not even about the closeness of Odunga or Judge William Ouko to some of the people who've been mentioned. In my own opinion, I think there are quite a number of judges who've come out to be so independent, delivering robust rulings, landmark rulings, and many people are actually not yet prepared for such a kind of judgment. You see, we are coming from a past where the judiciary was not an independent institution per se. Just like the National Assembly, we have a National Assembly which we thought that would be a watchdog over the executive, but they turned up to be lapdogs of the executive. And I know probably the executive must have been having that perception. And you can remember the president saying when he was in Kisii, "We've given your son this job." You see, immediately when the president said that, I said, now the president is getting it wrong, because the Chief Justice would actually want to actually hold firmly to the ground and actually deliver rulings or make decisions that would be for prosperity. But that one is actually now boomeranging on the president, because he thought that by accepting the name of Magara and sending it to Parliament, he was doing him a favor and Maraga would actually play ball. That's not the case. Judicial review is one of the most sensitive areas in any jurisdictions, because if you look at most of these government authorities, institutions, and even those people who've been given mandate to come up with regulations, most of the time they they make regulations or things that borders on our rights. And if it's a matter of going against the Constitution, then whatever you make would be subject to judicial review. It is important that people now start understanding that this judicial review, it is no longer those lofty promises or grandiose promises that we inherited from common law. Now they have actually been ingrained in our Constitution, and it behoves everybody. It behoves each one of us actually to live with that spirit. So what I want to say, even if it was still Justice Owino Kotieno who would have been presiding over that case, and to me it is illegal, I would have still given the same judgment was given by these three people, because we must be prepared to have robust ruling, to have people who are independent, and I think we should even be encouraging some other judges to behave like the way the three judges did. And don't forget that even the same judge, Justice George Odunga, was awarded a certain award for being one of the most effective judges insofar as the division of the judicial review is concerned.
But even just drawing from what Joy said, something as little as a last name could change the whole equation. So, Dr. Gakuru, this being said, I mean, when the judiciary makes a ruling that seems favorable to Jubilee, the opposition will have a problem and say the judiciary is being used, and vice versa when the ruling favors the opposition. So where does this leave us as a country? Because at the end of the day, the judiciary plays a very important role. After the election, we will still have petitions where we will entrust the judiciary to take care of in an objective manner. So where do we begin with that?
I think depending on where you're sitting, when a ruling comes, you will either support it or complain about it. Jubilee was hoping that the ruling would be made in its favor, and the other side was hoping that it would be made on their favor. And when it comes out, the reactions we've seen in this country, really, over the years, even from 2013, really indicates clearly how individuals in this country are reacting. And people are free. It's a democracy that we are running in this country. And people should react whichever way they want to. But my point should be that the judiciary consistently should continue to make robust judgments. And I believe that over time, Kenyans will actually learn that we have a strong and independent institution in our judiciary. That way, over years, then we are going to really have an institution that Kenyans can trust.
Right. Joy, do you think we, just the whole issue with where the judiciary is standing now, do you think that will have an impact just before or after the general elections, especially where the judiciary is expected to make such important decisions?
The impact is already being felt. Because with all these court cases that are coming up, we can see jurisprudence being developed. And when jurisprudence is developed, for example, on public participation, Judge Odunga had pronounced himself before on what amounts to public participation. Right. And then when there's this JR matter, again, you see he comes up and says, you know what, there is the issue of public participation. Now, my problem with this entire furore is when you're looking at the outcomes, what do we have? For example, yesterday we had the presidential candidates meeting the IEBC. In obedience to what the court had prescribed, let us have public participation. I watched that session from beginning to end. What value did it add to the tendering process? I am not sure. In fact, I agree with what Abdul Badida was saying. You're saying this entire process is not because of tendering or the court said or the IEBC said. It's simply suspicion. We have no trust with each other. There's no integrity in our processes. And therefore, if one person has said this, we feel automatically the other person must say this. And this adversarial system is what is making even court cases not become something that is of national pride. Right. Because if it's public institutions that are in court and the court has pronounced itself, there should be no talking of a loss. Because it's a public institution, the court has clarified the matter, the public should be benefiting from this. And where I sit right now, I'm wondering, even as we're going to court, even as the court is making these pronouncements, do they have in mind, not just the political players, do they have in mind the other millions of Kenyans who are in Lamu, just waiting for these elections to get over and done with so the curfew is lifted, who are in Meru, who are being displaced and are just waiting for this election to get over and done with so life goes back to normal, who are the businessmen whose containers are not coming through because nobody is shipping to Kenya until elections are over. Are we looking simply at the parochial interests of our politicians, or are we looking at generally what the entire nation is waiting for? We all want to exhale. August 8th is finished and we want to move on. But if the courts then become a stumbling block, and the nature of the courts is that it's a stumbling block that cannot be ignored. Like, for example, if you make an attack against the judiciary and they tell you stop attacking, a certain thing is over and done with. But if you go and file a matter, then people have to instruct lawyers, they have to go, they have to argue. It stops you dead in your tracks. So it's one of those obstacles that cannot be ignored. So when we use the court in the process, and it looks like it is stumbling blocks towards August 8th, then the anxiety that is espoused by the people also impedes what the court is, the image of the court, such that even after the election, will there be enough public confidence left for us to go to them back as an arbiter? All
right. I'd like to come to you, Kaguche, but let's first take a call. We have Margaret, who's calling in from Sabatia. Margaret, good morning. What's your question or comment?
Habari yako?
Mzuri sana, Margaret. Endelea.
Bila kuanza tu wa Kiswahili.
Endelea.
Sasa mimi nasema hivi. Hatujakataa na hatujui ni lini uchaguzi itafanyika kwa sababu niliona maandamano ikifanyika wakisema Hasani aondoke. Na sisi wa Kenya tukakubali, kwa sababu amesema Hasani ameiba kura aondoke, waache tuweke Chebukati. Chebukati hata hajafanya kazi wa jamaa. Anazuzuliwa tu kila mara koti. Na tujui uchaguzi yake atafanya uzuri ama atafanya ubaya. Kufuatana na kitu tu makaratasi ya kuchapisha kura. Hata mnaweza chukua tu exercise book na mnafanyia hii mambo na inakwisha. Na koti yetu tafadhali, msilaumu rais tafadhali. Koti yetu haifanyi mzuri. Wakati NASA inapeleka kesi yao huko, ni koti inaishughulikia sana. Na mimi ninajua koti ndio yenye inaweza amua mambo yale yanaharibika. Nikiangalia nakuta koti imekuwa imeegemea upande moja. Na tulichagua Maraga tukaona yeye atasimama famu katikati. Kama upande hili mbaya yanasema, kama upande hili mbaya anasema. Sasa angalia ile moto yenye yeye anawasha. Mambo ikikuja kotini wanashughulika zaidi mambo ya NASA Jubilee kipeleka Jubilee haionekani ni kitu. Mimi naongea kama mwana NASA. Lakini mimi nasikia uchungu sana. Hata matamshi ile inatoka kwa viongozi wetu wa NASA ni kali sana. Lakini wakati rais akijaribu kujibu kama yeye mwenye kuongoza taifa, hata kwa boma baba anaguruma.
Alright.
Ile mabaya anaona baba anaguruma.
Asante sana Margaret. Tumekusikia Margaret, asante sana. Acha tusikilize Kombo calling in from Kitengela. Kombo, many thanks for calling. I understand we've lost our connection with Kombo, but yes, that comment by Margaret also brings in, to the IEBC issue. I'll come to you in a minute, Dr. Gakuru.
You know, in politics, perception is reality, and you can hear it from that Kenyan. Basically, looking at the whole thing, thinks that our courts are biased on one side. And she's voiced her opinion, and she is saying she feels really bitter about what is happening. She is really hurt. In fact, Uchungu is being hurt by what is going on. I do believe that, and this is why, even because I've been in the public service, when it comes to making a decision on an important matter, and you think that there may be perception of bias, you declare interest on the matter and you set aside so that other Kenyans, there are very many Kenyans who can sit on that bench, can move ahead with the matter, listen to it and determine, so that the public will have confidence in the rulings that are passed.
All right, let's move away from the judiciary. Let's have your final comments on this, Kagucha.
Yeah, it is not in question that Justice Odunga is one of the most meticulous and thorough judges in Kenya. He's an intellectual, he's a powerhouse in himself. And he really carries the cycle of justice and the judiciary. But again, I think where the noise is coming in is because if you look at the judgment that they have done, on this one, I think I would actually fault the judiciary to some extent. Because normally, and Kotieno, you will agree with me, when you're making this kind of a judgment and a ruling, whereby we are in a very, very sensitive period, it is important to make a judgment that also tends to give some more guidance and a way forward. You say that you have declared that the presidential ballot papers will not be printed by that particular company because there was no public participation. Then I expected him to define further what kind of public participation, now that the others were not declared illegal for the other ballots. Then I would also have expected him, considering that we are already time-pressed, I would have expected him to give us, and the bench to give us some kind of timelines in terms of we expect this public participation to take place within the next 2 days. Then we expect, and then even kind of seem to kind of reduce even some of the timelines that are statutory and which are already in law. Because if you were to follow all those timelines that we have been given, for sure, we will not be able to meet this deadline. So in my opinion, this judgment has left us in a trap, basically. If you look at, going back, we can go back there. If you look at going ahead again, as a country, then we are trapped. And that's why you see that kind of a lady who sounds to me more of a man on the street, kind of is saying, mbiu ya mgambo ikilia, kuna jambo. Because the president has not been probably complaining before about these kind of things. Now when he has complained, what she's saying is that we find there's a problem. And Joy has consistently said here that IEBC is under attack. And yet we are expecting IEBC to deliver in the next 27 days. The question is, do we really want IEBC to deliver?
Right.
And are we setting ground for IEBC not to deliver so that then we can have more litigation?
Elections.
Again, have we also become too litigious as a country, as political parties? And if we are so litigious, then of course, then the question is, what do we do after the election? What else are we left with?
Going to do? All right, so that brings us to the IEBC issue. And, you know, you all seem to agree that it is IEBC which is under attack and not so much the judiciary. So let's focus on that presidential ballot printing paper row. We had IEBC yesterday following that court ruling having public participation with the presidential candidates, which ended without consensus. A lot of mistrust being seen. Section of candidates saying these papers can be printed locally. We have the capacity, but some say as much as we have the capacity, we do not trust those papers being printed locally. I mean, let's begin with you, Kotieno. Is it really an issue of whether to print them locally or not to print them locally? Or is it an issue of the allegations by Jubilee that NASA is working with the IEBC to ensure that the elections are not held on the 8th of August?
Well, it borders, one, on the question of trust. And two, it is about fidelity to the law. And three, there is a party that actually feels that one of the institutions or one of the parties is not keen to follow some of the guidelines, either in our statutes or in our constitutions or in the regulations. And I know NASA, my party, is very good at looking at these things with that hawkish kind of eyes. And probably this is where IEBC has been getting it wrong, because IEBC is an independent commission funded by taxpayers' money, and they even have a legal department. I assume that the legal department of IEBC should be burning its midnight oil to their very best so that we do not get ourselves into this, because this case has actually been thrown out because of inadequate public participation or lack of that public participation. You know, if I were IEBC, what I would have done, I would have crafted regulations. These regulations would have informed what kind of public participation is going to be there. This public participation necessarily does not need to come from the National Assembly. Members of Parliament need not actually to craft regulations for IEBC. This is a subsidiary legislation.
Do you agree with Kagusha that the court should have specified further on what kind of public participation, especially considering that we have very, very little time to the elections?
And timelines also.
I do not agree with that. I want, Kagusha, I would want Chebukati himself and his team to have actually come up with regulations long time ago. These regulations should have been taken to Parliament. Parliament should have actually done what passed them, so that now we couldn't be having these reasons that we are complaining. And
but
they're
now
saying
we are here and we have 28 days to go, 27 days to go, for example, now. You know, we have 27 days to go.
Right.
And here we are. So why wouldn't the judiciary give us some more guidance so that we do not find ourselves trapped again in an illegality later on? Because whatever we do at this time, I do not think it is going to be feasible to deliver this tender in a legal manner, based on the ruling and based on the law that we have and timelines that we have.
There is something called public interest.
If there is still that goodwill and we want to do our things actually with that, in utmost good faith, it can still be done. Not unless we want to do things influenced by malafide intention. But I believe that it's never too late
to do something. I mean, Dr. Gakuru, you're speaking of public goodwill.
The public interest in this matter is that we actually go to and vote on the 8th of August. And as we make judgment about a process and a procedure, unless there's such huge injury to a particular party and an individual, it really does not matter where this ballot paper is printed. Because I am a politician and I want to go for my people to go and vote for me on the 8th of August. And I do not want anything that happens that process to delay that, the actual voting. What I know is that when you go into a polling station, we have got a whole set of officials that are there to ensure that the voting is free and fair and transparent.
Now, we've always had those, Dr. Gakuru, and there's always been allegations of vote
and the problem has never been the issue of the ballot paper. It has never been. It is the first time we are having a contest about the ballot paper itself. The issue has never been about the ballot paper. It has been about other processes. And that is where we should be focusing. But it appears that we have a party in this particular case that actually want to ensure that we do not go to the election. Because if you look at the Public Procurement Act of 2008, Public Procurement and Disposal Act, if we are to follow the requirements of that process, we are not going to have that ballot printed.
Joy, in your view, where is this deadlock when you're coming into the IEBC? We seemingly cannot move from this point because of the mistrust among the political parties.
And you see the mistrust that we have put upon ourselves has given us such a bile that it does not matter, even when the courts act in good faith, even when the IEBC acts in good faith, we still have problems because people are looking at this scenario in terms of, remember earlier you talked about having parochial interests, where you're looking at this because first, even the fact that the judgment hived off the presidential ballot papers only, to me doesn't make any sense. Because when you're going to an election, we are going to be receiving 6 ballot papers. If I'm a person in the village, the most important person to me is my governor and the MCAs. That is where my all in all is. Because the way the presidency is now is not like the days of Moi. Our presidency has been curtailed and contained by many checks and balances. So right now, the person is more concerned about the delivery where they are.
But well, let me just hold you there. We'll come back to you. It is now 58 minutes past the hour. At this point, we'd like to release our viewers on KTN Home. We thank you for being with us on Morning Express. But Life and Style is coming up next. For those who want to keep up with the conversation, you can cross over to KTN News. All right, go ahead, Joy.
And when you look at this instance where the political parties keep going to court to work towards IEBC to try and correct this and correct that, these political parties have been in existence for how long? They have known the election law is in place for how long? How come in the last 2 months is when these court cases, because like yesterday, there's a matter that's been filed now about the biometric identification. And you have to ask yourself, if every single thing was a problem, why weren't all the suits then brought at once? Why is it one after another after another? Then that's why the argument that maybe somebody is not ready for elections and maybe this is a process of trying to stop the August 8th date from happening. Maybe we are trying to force a caretaker argument, a caretaker government. Now, all this speculation is coming in place and is not without traction simply because of the conduct of the political parties. Now, we have to get to a place where, as Mheshimiwa said, the interest of the Mwananchi has to start meaning something to the courts, to the political parties, and even to the commentators like us. We have to get to a place where this is not a do-or-die contest. The 8th, there'll be dawn, and the 8th, there'll be dusk, and the 9th will come. What do we do with the 9th? Children have to prepare for KCSE. Children have to prepare, businessmen have to go back to their businesses. We have to come back to work. If there's no country, what is the use of
even going to an election in the first place?
Exactly. So we have to come to a situation whereby we look at everything in its entirety. But where we are right now, we are only looking at it internal vision, because all these victories will mean nothing if at the end of the day the country implodes. So let us put everything in context and choose our battles.
Speaking of looking at everything in its entirety, Kagucha, you asked a very important question earlier on. Are we creating that environment for IEBC to deliver just 27 days to the election?
We are not, and we are hampering that environment. In the first place, again, for judiciary, how do you declare the presidential ballot printing or tender illegal without having to declare these other illegal? In actual sense, once you have declared one, which was a part of the whole, eventually you have declared the whole illegal. So basically what you're saying is that even in these other ballots that we are printing, there was no public participation because it could not have been that we had public participation on these others and we did not have on this one. And so that's where we are saying we think, and I also think this country is being set up into a very, very terrible and very disturbing kind of an environment. And everyone needs to be concerned as a country. Now, of course, I did not know that yesterday another case was actually launched on biometrics. Right. She's telling me now that, or she has said it here. If that is the case, then what are you expecting of that case? And what are you expecting the, again, judiciary to do?
So that we cannot use manual backup.
Are you getting?
We must use...
Yeah, and then Maraga then cannot run away from this. Are we having judiciary then kind of running the show? Is the judiciary then taking over the IEBC work? Is the judiciary over-indulging into issues that it ought to give better guidance? Because in some cases then, you need to give guidance more than give rulings.
No,
you know, and that has happened from the Supreme Court in the past.
Right. But given, the problem is the courts must hear the matters that are brought to them. The court does not move itself, it is moved.
Indeed.
And so if litigants come to you, you must pronounce yourself on an issue. The problem is the people who keep going to court,
I would like you to remind,
the parties that keep litigating.
It's true. I have no problem with them litigating. But also remember, in the public interest, remember we had the case of Charity Ngilu when she was a minister for lands. And we had NLC, National Lands Commission. What did the Supreme Court do? They never made a pronouncement. They never made a judgment. They gave an advisory, which settled the issue. They told them, go back and this is what you do. In some instances, remember even about the commissioners themselves, when we were removing them illegally. What happened? We were told, go and sit together in a room and agree on how you're going to do it. Now, this case, was it so difficult to do that? Was it so difficult for the judiciary to, in the spirit of Kenya, and in the Kenyan spirit, and in the spirit of ensuring that we do not have anxiety that is building up in, today, was it so hard then to bring them together and say, the political parties sit together with the IEBC and thrash out these issues? Remember, one of the issues that was pointed out initially, Kotieno, was that Jubilee and the First Family had a connection with the printer of these ballot papers. But when, again, the case was launched in court, that was nowhere to be seen. And then you realize that was just politics out there. But when the case was launched, it was not there to be seen. So you see, there is a problem. And again, the issue of public participation. Do we normally have public participation when it comes to procurement? Do you call the public to come and participate in a procurement process? We don't do that normally. Why? Because the law that is governing public procurement is a law that was created, is as a result of public participation. There was public participation coming up with that law. Look at even the commissioners themselves. They are there as a result of public participation and stakeholders' involvement. You know? So if they are there as a result of involvement of the public and the stakeholders, then the law as well is also as a result of public participation. You expect then the whole process has public participation in it. You do not then again hive off one area and say this one did not have and this one we are silent about it.
Earlier on, Kotieno mentioned that it is an issue of either one or both parties not wanting to follow the right set of procedures. But Kotieno, do you agree that it is the country and the stakeholders not providing the right, a conducive environment for IEBC? Because just listen to Margaret when she called in from Sabatia earlier on, saying, first of all, Kenyans were taken through the whole hounding out of the first IEBC team, I mean, together with Isaac Hassan, and when Chebukati and his team came, there was a lot of confidence from Kenyans that, fine, things are going to be all right. But we're still seeing a lot of attacks towards the IEBC, a lot of criticism towards the IEBC itself. So is it an issue of not having the right environment, or are they just not delivering on their mandate?
I think it is not even a question of environment. It is a question of they not delivering on their mandate. I think either, even if you are employed in a certain organization, like for me, I'm a member of county assembly. Whenever I wake up, or when I go to sleep, or probably when I'm just bathing, it always rings in my mind, what am I going to do tomorrow? What are some of the important motions that I need to sit down, research on them, so that when the speaker gives me opportunity, probably to move it, I move something that is credible. IEBC, like any other state organ, ought to live with that spirit. And I just want to read for you that Article 227 on procurement of public goods says that when a state organ, IEBC is a state organ, or any other public entity contracts for the goods or services, it shall do so in accordance with a system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. That is the Constitution. So some of the most important things that are in this article are the question of fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effectiveness.
So how was the presidential tender, printing of ballot papers for presidential, how was it unfair as opposed unequitable not cost-effective, as opposed to these other. But really, you can't use that article to support that claim. Again, also remember, in Article 159 of the Constitution, again, it also talks about the issues of procedure and technicalities. We shall not use procedure and technicalities to defeat justice. Are you getting? Are we finding ourselves now embroidered in small technical procedural issues as opposed to the bigger justice, as opposed to the good public goodwill? I think we have a problem.
You know, this goodwill that we keep on saying, to me, this goodwill is part of the sovereignty, and this public interest must not trample on the sovereignty of the republic. We are saying that we want to have free, fair, and credible elections. You see, anything that will be short of this free and fair and credible election will actually be next to anarchy, and even the sovereignty of this country will actually be compromised, because sovereignty is that ability of the country to determine its own future. If it will be chaotic, it will be, if we get into that state of nature, the Leviathan, the way Hobbes said it, I'm sure even both President Uhuru Kenyatta and that person who might be president might not even have that opportunity to rule this country. So it is important that even when we say that in the interest of the public, that interest of public should not actually compromise on the quality and even on the better results that we have. Me, I want to see an elections that would meet the standards. Even if Uhuru wins or Raila wins, as long as they meet the standards that have been set in this constitution, I would go home peaceful man.
Right. I mean, Dr. Gakuru, Jubilee seems to be accusing NASA of working with the IEBC, but clearly from Kotieno, they're not quite on the same page just yet. But where do you think this deadlock arises from? Is it that environment we're speaking about? Is it the decision or the guidance of the judiciary that was not enough on the way forward for the IEBC?
For me and where I sit and where I'm coming from, IEBC is pronounced as a strong and independent institution. However, the individuals who've gone into work, they have not been given any space to do their work. And there appears to me one of the contestants for the big seat, one side of the political divide, is hell-bent to ensure that IEBC does not function properly. You cannot give somebody a job to go into the ring and be a boxer and fight for you, and then you encircle their hearts behind their back. It is not possible. They are not going to deliver the results. Efficiency, productivity in any way, IEBC hearts are completely tied. They are in court. Again, they are going to go back to court on the issue of the biometrics. And when are we going to give these guys any space to do that? No. I think there is no institution that can be expected to be 100% pure, perfect, and correct. But the whole question of pragmatic incrementalism. We have a very young commission running the IEBC. Can we give them a little bit of space and encouragement and motivation for them to actually get this job done? Why don't we start asking, what can we do for IEBC? What kind of support do we give them for them to actually do that job in less than a month? Right. That is what we should be doing, not taking them to court and holding them down. It appears to me an individual or a group, one side of a political divide, does not want us to go and vote on the 8th of August. And therefore, the whole perception of people wanting us to move into a caretaker government because the Constitution says that the vote must be held on the 8th of August, that is where we are being taken to.
So let's
and the
focus
courts
on that.
are actually being used. They're actually being used to take us into that process.
Let's focus
and
on
what
that
happens to me is that the courts are actually trying to take over the running of this country, and it is not fair.
Right. So, Joy, these are the allegations coming in, especially from the Jubilee side, that the courts and the IEBC, like Dr. Gakuru here mentions, are colluding with the opposition to stall the elections and ensure that they do not happen on the 8th of August, but they're also plotting to lay the ground for the formation of a coalition government. So let's focus on what Dr. Gakuru says in terms of asking what can we do to help IEBC deliver on its mandate. Now, according to IEBC timelines, the printing of presidential ballot papers was to begin on the 18th of this month. That is about 6 days away. It's not very long. And as it stands, there is no consensus on where, first of all, to print those ballot papers. So what options does the IEBC have?
You know, first, there's something that Kotieno said that I think I need to respond to. When you talk about the sovereignty of the people, then the sovereignty of the people lies with the Kenyan people and not with the political class. Therefore, if the Kenyan people are ready to go for an election, if the political class do not feel sufficiently prepared for the same, they should not visit their lack of preparedness on the Kenyan people. Because for whose benefit? Who are you running to lead? You're running to lead the Kenyans. And if the Kenyans are saying, look, enough already. Like, I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and I love the law, and I love courtroom drama. It's what I live for. But even my head is spinning with just how much litigation that is going on right now. And so that's why I must reiterate, if we are talking about a credible process, the credible process should not wear all of us down to a level where like, over and done with. It should be something that is a build-up. It should be, this is a season where we should be listening to what our leaders are saying, looking at the manifestos. Instead, we are waiting, is that ruling out, is that ruling out, is that ruling out? So I find there's a miscommunication there. But to your question, what can we do to help the IEBC deliver? First, just give them a chance to deliver. This IEBC, this current commission has not been tried for anything. This is their first real test. All that we have been litigating on is innuendo, is we are afraid of this, we are afraid of that. Give them the chance. Let us see what they can do, what they can deliver. Secondly, even as now the people who are in the contest, let us have in our minds that elections are there, and as any contest, there is the likelihood of winning and the likelihood of losing. If we're psychologically prepared for either way, because both sides are guilty of this, talking as if, by the way, this thing is a sure bet, is a sure win. We are going to victory. Now, if it happens and you lose, even you yourself psychologically, you find politicians after elections, those ones who have lost will be in depression for like a year afterwards, because you've invested everything and you have psyched yourself. And this is the only place where I see that happening. In other countries, elections are run by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. It's a government institution. You go to the office of the Ministry of Internal Affairs to cast your vote with your ID. It's no big deal, and then you go back to work. But in Kenya, everything has to stop. Even as a society, I pray we develop to a level where it's not mistrust that's leading us to elections, but elections are a chance to actually just change our leaders. It's a chance for us to have a fresh beginning or to give a mandate to the ones who are going forward. But this culture that we have developed in Kenya, that elections are do or die, they are high stakes, that is the kind of narrative that will not help the IEBC, because if something is do or die, it's like you're a doctor and it is surgery. And if you just cut the wrong place,
everything goes wrong. And it's a lot of pressure, understandably.
And that pressure is what is putting us in this situation, because it's like everything has to be in place. And if one thing is out of place, it's a pressure cooker situation, it will explode. It won't. Kenyans are not ready to fight.
All right.
The country is not going to ban. We are going to prepare our children for KCPE and KCSE, and we're going to do business.
After the elections,
yes.
Life must continue. All right. Let me get your final comments on this, Kotieno. Both the judiciary and the IEBC, as it is, have a perception out there in the electorate. And like Dr. Gakuru said, in politics, perception is reality. With just about 27 days to the election, where do we begin in reviving public confidence in these two very important institutions, which will play a crucial role, even in petitions which will arise after the elections?
Well, there are still some other, I must agree, that there are other things that have not been done.
Right.
And even when you see NASA going to court yesterday, they were only going, we are going to court to seek for clarifications. We want to know, what is this complementary system that would be used? How is it operating? Those are small things.
But this is something that Kaguchi has brought up before. And maybe just to pose it to you, Joe, before I come to you, Kotieno. In terms of the role of the judiciary right now, we have time constraints to the election. And so Kaguchi is asking, why isn't the judiciary giving more specific guidance to save time? Because, look, NASA is going back to court to seek clarification, further extending the judicial process.
No, the problem
we've sought for these clarifications. We've done letters. We've even asked for meetings, but they are not willing to share with us information. This is an information that is meant for public consumption. In fact, all voters should actually be knowing what is this complementary system, you see. But if IEBC does not want actually to share with us this information, then the only way that we can get this information is to petition the court so that they give us the information. It is actually for the public good.
I disagree. Yes. I disagree.
All right, very briefly.
You don't need to court. You don't need to go to court. You just needed to have watched a feature yesterday in one of the TV stations, where they took us through the whole process of voting. And that issue now you want the court to clarify was clarified there. We were watching, the whole country was watching.
So time constraints, you know, it's the things that need to be put in consideration.
Someone is not going to court to get, you know, court does not have the KIMS and does not have the complementary system that
the
IEBC
court doesn't have the answer to the question.
It doesn't
don't have the answer.
It doesn't have an answer.
But the prayers that are being sought are not for clarification.
Yeah.
The prayers that are being sought is to prevent the IEBC from using any other system other than the system of biometrics. Now, if
it is true.
Those are the prayers.
It is returning
now,
the issue.
He's saying, let us not do the complementary system. The way the KIMS has been set up, it recognizes both. If you're identified biometrically, it will accept. If you miss biometrically and they have to use your ID, then they will scan your ID and that will become your biometrics. Now, at the end of the day, both being accepted by the KIMS, it means that both are captured and the votes cast will tally with the biometrics identified. So there'll be that collision so that you see the people who have cast their votes are the ballots that we are counting. Then you can say, now that is credible, that can be transmitted. That seems straightforward enough.
All right, but NASA still need that clarification from our court, and it is their right.
And they should get it from the IEBC, who has the answer.
Who say the IEBC has refused to give that clarification.
How have they refused? And yet
IEBC has given all of us.
I have attended trainings for lawyers to do this. I have attended trainings for judicial officers to learn this. I have attended forums, public forums by IEBC in social halls, teaching Kenyans how this new system works.
All right, we have to wind up. So, Kotieno, then why is NASA still in court?
And they will go to court again, by the way, on the issue of voter register. They will say
there's one
voters. You wait, you'll see.
All right, let's wind up on this. Kotieno, let's hear from you, especially from the NASA side.
If he says that NASA will be going to court, then he knows the ills that are facing IEBC. Because even at this particular moment,
the excuses.
IEBC need actually to put all this information in their portal, and it's still missing. You see, the court is the last center for arbitration. You see, and the law is very clear that share this information in a portal.
But
all right, let's wind up. Let's hear from Dr. Gakuru, your final comments.
Kotieno says last whatever for arbitration, but for NASA it's actually the first. You wake up in the morning and go there. How are we going to go and have the vote on 8th of August if you keep stopping IEBC from doing its job? Former commissioners were not good. Even a former vice president had to sit on a tarmac for them to be kicked out of office illegally. We went through that process. We have a whole new team. Please, for goodness sake, let us give this guy support and encouragement so that we can be done with the vote on the 8th of August. My sister here talked about for politicians do or die. I am a politician trying to seek the position of governor. If I go to Nyeri and the people of Nyeri do not give me that mandate, I should go back to the university and continue teaching the next day. That's what I've done all of my life.
Right.
And life should not have to stop, and Kenyans do not have to die. We do not have to hold this country at gunpoint so that we can have our way.
All right. Now, that's a good point to end the political point this morning. Many thanks, ladies and gentlemen. We've been speaking to Dr. Wahome Gakuru, who is the Jubilee candidate for the Nyeri gubernatorial seat. We've also been speaking to Joy Brenda Mdivo, who is a lawyer and a political analyst, John Kaguchia, who is a governance expert, and last but not least, Owino Kotieno, who is the Sarangombe member of County Assembly. Many thanks for watching the political point, which brings us to a break here on Morning Express, but don't go away. The show is not over. More news making headlines coming up after the break.
This is KTN News.
Hi, they call me Chichi, but you can